Hey guys, it's Helen Hartsmith here again with
Kathy.
And we are here. Oh my gosh, Kathy.
I can't believe we've made it this far.
This is monumental.
This is amazing.
This is episode 400.
Oh my goddess. 400. We've been doing this for 4 years.
Well, we're starting 4 years.
I've been talking to you
for a lot longer than 4 years. Don't even.
I know. It has been a long damn time.
It has. So we're here with our season opener. We are recording episode 400 of the podcast, the Heart of the Witch's Path podcast. So if you've been with us and listened to us this long, we thank you and we appreciate you.
And we appreciate that you appreciate it enough to listen this much.
Right. I'm sorry if I sound a little crackly, but I'm a little under the weather, but
Tis the season.
That's right. So before we get started, let's cover our business. What's that? It's time for the correspondence of the week. Kathy, why don't you tell us what our correspondence is?
Our correspondence this week is the color black.
Oh my. And
Wow.
Kathy, why don't you tell us about the color black?
Yeah, so the color black corresponds with divination, beginnings, creation, patience, absorbing energies, binding, stability, neutralizing forces, protection, karma, death. There's so much. Overcoming obstacles, sacrifice, separation, plumbing for some reason. Yeah, so much. Black is a very versatile color.
Definitely.
And the reason for that correspondence will become apparent, when we tell you
as
what
we
it
speak.
is. So that was our... Hey.
What was it? It was our correspondence of the week. So this week we thought we would talk about hexing, banishing, and binding.
Yeah, I had a question from a friend of ours, and you will know who you are when you listen to this, about a way to banish someone from their life. And my first question was, what is it that you want to accomplish? Let's talk about this a little bit more before I tell you how to, kick someone to the curb.
Right.
Because is that what you really want?
Right.
So there's some ethics involved.
Definitely.
With banishing, binding, and hexing.
Yeah.
And it all comes back to the Wiccan Rede and it harm none. Now,
well, I think we should preface that by saying for us. It comes back to the Rede and do as ye will and harm none.
I think it's generally accepted that and harm none is not just, you can't hurt a fly. It's do things that will cause the least amount of harm, but that also means the least amount of harm to you.
Right. Well, and honestly, I think that for different people, that has different perceptions, and this comes back
it's very subjective.
to that perception, because there are folks that have that fluffy bunny image of the Rede, and
I can't hex anyone. But if you're walking down the street and somebody walks up to you and goes to punch you in the face, are you just going to stand there and take it, or are you going to do something to protect yourself? I make it a practice to never do anything magically that I would not do in person, physically.
Right. And so I think that when it comes to hexing, banishing, and binding, I think that it should not, for me, it is something that I never do lightly.
Right.
I never think about lightly.
Right. It has to be a very extreme situation that cannot be resolved in a mundane fashion.
Right. And because for me, there is if I'm thinking about hexing, banishing, or binding someone, then for me, it becomes part of messing with that other person's free will.
Depending on what you're doing. Yes.
And I very much try to keep to the Rede. I I believe that there is good stuff there in the read. I believe in the word so much that I now have "and it harm none"
Right.
tattooed
we both
on
do.
my skin.
We both do.
So I really believe and try to live by the read as much as possible. Now,
and there's alternates too. When you think about hexing someone, okay, yeah, you could do a hex on someone to get them to lose their job, but then you get that karmic backlash.
right.
And so wouldn't it be better to do a positive spell on someone to maybe encourage them to find a different job that is a
Right.
better job for them, that is somewhere not at the company that you work at?
Right.
You know, you have someone who is in the neighborhood that's interfering with you in your yard. You know, maybe you do a spell to help them, you know, move to Hawaii where it's very nice and warm if
Right.
they like that, you know?
Why don't you win the lotto?
Right.
And move away from me.
So there's ways to avoid. I don't know that I've ever actually done a hex. I've done a binding. I've done a banishing. But there's ways to get around hexing so that you're not incurring that backlash upon yourself.
Right. Now, I think it remains to be said, yes, I live by the read as much as possible. However, do not push me.
Yes.
Because
do no harm, but take no shit.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I am perfectly capable of hexing someone. For me, it's a last resort.
Right. But again, I'm not going to stand on the street and let someone walk up and punch me.
Exactly.
I'm not going to stand there and let somebody, I don't know, beat or molest my grandchildren without calling the cops.
Right.
And or doing a spell
Right.
to invoke justice upon them.
Correct.
You know?
Right. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me, everyone who follows this kind of a path, you have to sit down and you have to really think about it boils down to ethics. What are your ethics? What are your magical parameters?
What are you willing to incur upon your own karma?
Right.
To make something bad happen to somebody else.
Right, because the fact for me remains that the energy that I put out there is what I'm going to draw to me.
Right.
If I'm a bitter, ugly, nasty person, then I'm going to get bitterness and ugliness and nastiness come back to me. It's that law of attraction.
Right.
And so what are you willing to incur? Those are the rules that you have to sit down for yourself. Right. You need to sit down and you need to think about, what am I willing to do? What am I not willing to do? Right.
And part of it is too, it's a bad idea to interfere with someone's free will. You know, you don't want to do something that is going to force someone into a path they wouldn't normally choose.
Right. I mean, and just like you don't do a love spell with a particular person, a specific person in mind, you don't do, for me, I don't do any kind of spell work with someone specific in mind unless I have their permission, or if the situation has just gotten so bad that I can't take it anymore.
Right, and that's when I've done bindings and banishings.
Yes, recently as a coven we read Coventry Magic by Jackie Smith.
So good.
And in that book, she talks about a candle dripping spell, I believe, is the classification of it. And it talks about drawing sweetness to you.
A sweetening spell is what I would consider that to be.
And I recently had a situation where things were getting bad.
Right.
Things were getting, and I was talking to you about it.
Right.
You know, and trying to decide, and this is one thing that I would suggest to anyone. Think about your situation and before you actually go through with anything.
Right.
And, we were discussing, what was I comfortable doing? What, because the situation was getting kind of scary for me. I don't want to give out like too many details or whatever. But I read this spell. We read this spell in the text, and it was almost as if this spell was being presented to me at a time when I needed it the most.
Right.
And
has it worked for you?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So I did the spell.
So this is an example where, you could have hexed this person. Right.
But in
isn't
a
it
way,
better to do this where you're putting out good vibrations, nice things, and you're getting them back.
Right, because what the spell entailed was making someone sweet to you. Like turning their, negative emotions about you to positive.
Right.
And it did so well that I actually have the jar still constructed. And it's still where
it needs to be.
Right. Because in the book, at the end of the spell, Jackie suggests taking it, dismantling the jar.
Right.
But I finished the spell very quickly, and it worked so well that I wanted to keep that there. Like something was telling me to keep this together.
That sweetness going.
Right. And so it's worked very well. And so I don't feel that I handled the situation in a bad way. I mean, yes, I could have said, I hope this person loses their job.
Right.
I hope this person, gets pushed away from me.
Right.
Blah, 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 whatever. But I didn't choose that path.
Right. So let's talk about when a banishing is a good idea. And I'm saying that because part of the question that was posed to me was, how do I do this banishing? And I'm like, well, is that really what you want? And I guess we should back up and say you should sit down and think about what is the best possible outcome for everyone concerned. And in this situation, the person who came to me was like, well, I just want these people out of my life completely. And I was like, well, you might want that, but other people involved may not want that.
Right. So what's best for everyone?
So it's like when you get a divorce, and you got to share kids. Just because you don't want your ex anywhere near you, it doesn't mean your kids don't want them near you.
Right.
However, let's talk about my banishing spell.
Yes.
I have my daughter's biological father is a waste of life, basically. He ended up in prison when I was pregnant and didn't come out for any long period of time for the next 30 years. He was in a maximum security prison.
He was a repeat offender.
Violent person, very controlling, just the type of person you don't want anyone that you like to be around.
Right.
And he moved in. My daughter decided that she wanted to, get to know him and be friends with him, and whatever she wants to, put herself in harm's way. She's an adult. I can't stop that.
Right.
However, I don't want him anywhere near me.
Right.
So I actually at convocation I went up to Jackie and I said, or maybe I went to Miss Dorothy, and I said, this is what I need to do. I need to make sure this guy just never, ever, ever comes anywhere near me. And she's like, are you sure this is what you want to do? Because this is really serious. So if it had been a situation where the guy was semi-decent and we were sharing custody and he was seeing my daughter on weekends or whatever.
And had been a productive co-parent.
Right. Or even a not so productive, but still was willing to call up and do holidays or whatever. That's I would never have thought about doing a banishing because I don't want the guy around. Obviously, in this case, my daughter wants him around, so I don't want to banish him from her life.
Right.
But I definitely want to banish him from my life. And because my daughter was an adult, and because I had absolutely no reason to be in any kind of vicinity with this guy, I did a banishing. And I took his picture, and I ripped it up, and I took a black candle, and I inscribed his name on it, and I burned that sucker down. And he's lived in the area, I don't know, 5-10 years now.
Right.
I've never seen him.
Yeah.
Never seen him.
And that's an extreme case. And that's what I'm talking about. That's the kind of extremeness
right
that you need to establish for yourself.
So if you're getting stalked by someone, or if you're trying to leave an abusive partner,
Right.
or if you have a parent that is abusing you and you're just done with that relationship and you never want to have anything to do with that,
Right.
then a banishing is appropriate. A coworker, probably not.
Because you don't know it's a little hazy, because I actually had a coworker years ago that just, it seemed like she did everything possible to undermine me and my job. And there was a time when I considered, projecting out there, something about getting a new job, doing something to like get her away from me. And I thought about it for a long time. But things didn't reach the point where I was like, I have to do this.
Well, the thing about a coworker is you're only with them 8 or 9 hours a day.
Right.
And 5 to 6 days a week.
Right.
There are other things you can do, like a justice spell. If somebody's undermining you, to have that backlash come on them.
Right.
To encourage them to get a different job. To encourage you to get a different job.
Right.
There's
something else to change the
other
situation.
Things you can do besides banishing that person.
Right. So, yeah, so it becomes kind of like you have to get to a point in the road where you're just like, I cannot fucking take anymore.
And you have to try other methods. I mean, in that instance, you could have went to your boss and said, look, this is going on, and this is a problem.
Right. And I can't do this, blah, 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 this, that, and the other.
Right. Like, I actually had a situation at work where this girl was not good at her job, and I was spending more time following up on everything she was doing or fixing the things that she did wrong, and I didn't even think about magic. I went to my boss and said, look, this is happening, and if you don't fire her, I'm going to find another job. It's entirely up to you. I'm perfectly willing to find another job, but this is where it's at.
Right. And I think that, that you have to have that mundane. Kind of brings in that whole mundane thing.
Yeah, and that's part of magic. You have to do the mundane work.
Right, you have to do the mundane work before magic really kind of helps the situation out.
Right.
And so...
Well, they really go hand in hand. You can't just do magic and expect shit to happen.
Right.
And sometimes you just can't just do mundane stuff and expect it to happen.
Exactly.
Although a lot of times you can.
Right. And kind of where I was going with that was, if, especially in a work situation, if you're trying your best to make the situation work and it's not, then for me anyhow, as someone who might be, in charge of other people, I would appreciate someone taking the adult road.
Right.
And just coming to me and saying, look, this person isn't doing correctly.
Right.
We've tried. It's not working.
Right.
What can we do?
Right.
Because I can't take this anymore.
Yeah.
And if you're a valued employee, then either something will happen,
right,
and that person will be gone, or you'll need another job.
There'll be some kind of intervention,
right,
where somebody will sit and what is the word? Sit and try to help you guys work things out.
Right.
It's been a long day, guys. Sorry, words are not working. But yeah, there's mundane things you can do rather than banishing your coworker because he took your sandwich out of the refrigerator.
Right.
Right. I mean, let's be appropriate here. Mm-hmm. You don't wanna deliver karmic thunder upon somebody when really a conversation can work things out.
Exactly.
Now, there's sometimes a conversation doesn't work. Like a conversation with my ex would never accomplish anything besides someone calling 911. Right. Seriously. Right. So, I mean, in that instance, there was no other choice.
Right.
Now, so let's talk about...
So that's kind of like hexing and banishing.
So let's talk about
what about binding?
Yeah. So have you done any binding?
I helped you do a binding once.
Was
but I
that against my kid or
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
I think binding is probably like the lesser.
Yeah.
Like
yeah, because
the less, because I think these things are kind of like degrees. I think binding is probably like the least amount of, karmic backlash.
Right.
Banishing is after that, and then hexing is where you it's like release the Kraken.
Right.
Type stuff.
Right. And I think some things in hexing, like if you do a justice spell, is that really hexing, or is that?
For me, that was pretty. The situation warranted itself enough that something had to happen.
Well, I wouldn't.
And it just so happened that sweetness.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider that a hex, though. That's.
Well, the situation was to the point where I was going to hex.
Right.
But this spell presented itself, so it kind of worked better.
Always look for alternatives, guys, because you don't, hexing is should never be your first
line of defense.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about binding. So what is binding? So binding to me is...
It takes me back to the craft. I bind you from doing harm against yourself, and harm against others.
Yeah. So it's preventing that person from taking actions that will cause more harm. And some people will go, oh yeah, but you're interfering with free will. Yeah, okay. You are. But that again goes back to the least amount of harm.
Right.
That person, my daughter, because there's toxic relationship there for many years of her life. It's still not the greatest, but at least I can tolerate her for now. I mean, there came a point where dealing with her was causing me more psychological and physiological harm than doing this type of a binding would do. So, we did a binding to prevent her from harming me, my marriage, my husband, and herself.
Right.
So that's, pretty, it's pretty involved, but it's mild in comparison to some other things. Now, I've also done a binding on the woman my father married. If you've been listening to the podcast, then you've probably listened to the one where I talked about his death and how she was probably, pretty complicit in that, at least as far as getting him into the adult foster care. And she was trying to get custody of him from me and my sister, and we knew if that happened that he wouldn't last very long going back home with her.
Right.
And so I did a binding spell at that point to prevent her from taking custody. And of course she didn't get custody.
Right.
And she's actually, Dorothy Morrison has an oil that's, is it Flying Monkeys or...
I think so.
Or there's another one about getting that person away from you.
Right.
So, and some of the court paperwork that I sent out, I put that on her just to get her back. I mean, I didn't want her contacting me. I didn't want her contacting my sister. I didn't care if she visited my dad, although she was causing all kinds of grief with the people at the home. But I just didn't...
As far as decisions went.
Yes, I wanted her to be completely out of it.
Right.
And so... I think in a situation where you have a toxic ex, that a binding would probably be a better choice than a banishing, especially if there are children and or grandchildren involved. And something else that you really, really need to think about is it's not just you in this situation. It's you and the people around you.
Right. So
is it better to bind someone from bad gossip or bad talking you, whether on social media or in person or behind your back, or is it better to banish this person? I mean, I guess it depends on what they're doing.
Right. It depends on the situation, and it depends on what what are you willing to...
And the people around you. You might never want to see your ex again, but your kid might want to see your ex.
Right.
You might never want to see your kid again, but you might want to see your grandkids.
Right. And so, I want to say that, the line between binding and banishing can almost be a little blurry.
The situation where what calls for what is definitely blurry. And I would recommend that you sit down and you think about what your best outcome is. Is your best outcome to never see that ex? And for
Right.
your child to never see that ex? Or is it better for that person to stop being a dick and settle down and be respectful?
Right. And think about, like, another thing to think about too is, like, can you put a time limit on it? Because as we're sitting here talking about binding, one situation that kind of comes to mind for me is if you have a family member or a close friend or something like that that is, for instance, a drug addict or an alcoholic,
Right.
and they're making poor choices.
Right.
You can bind them from doing harm to others and doing harm to themselves, because you can't make that person
Right.
stop and
Right.
get treatment or whatever, but you can hopefully keep them from hurting you
Right.
and hurting others and hurting themselves. And there might come a time when that individual can go and get the help that they
Yeah, but the
need.
thing with the binding is that preventing them from hurting you and themselves, even when they do get treatment, hopefully, that binding is still in effect, and then you can rebuild
Right.
your relationship. Whereas if you banish someone, it's going to be
Exactly.
much harder to rebuild a relationship.
To bring it back into the fold. Yeah, definitely. So just some things to think about.
So what I told the person that I had this conversation is, do you really want to banish? Will a sweetening work? Will a binding work?
Right.
Come back to me when you have 3 words that are what you want, best case scenario out of this. And this person was like, well, I just don't want to see them again. And I'm like, well, you may not, but what about this person? This person
Right.
may want to still see them.
Right.
So is it better to ask for respect and consideration? Or is it better to ask for somebody to
cut
never
all
come
ties.
around? Yeah,
To cut all ties.
What is the better scenario? And again, it comes back to the end harm none. Yeah, not seeing that person is going to be great for you, but what about the other person involved? It might
Right.
not be so great for them.
Right.
And I'm trying to be really not specific. I could, do gendered, but I'm trying not to just because of this.
Right.
So really sit down and think about it. Take a day, take a week, take a month, and determine, is there something mundane I can do?
Right, because, you might have numerous situations that have brought you to that,
Right.
to that kind of saying, okay, drawing the line in the sand, okay, but you don't know the other person's side of things.
Right.
You don't know everything.
Right.
You might think you know everything, but trust me,
Yeah.
you don't.
You don't know that other person's perspective. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know how they feel. All you know is the way that they make you feel.
Right.
Or that you let them make you feel.
Right.
And your poor relationship didn't happen in a day. So making a split decision in a day is probably a really bad idea.
Right. Right. And I think that's the biggest takeaway. If there was anything that I could have a listener take away from this discussion, the biggest thing I could say is don't hex, bind, or banish in an instant.
Right.
Take the time to think about it.
Right. Think about what your best case scenario is. Come up with 3 words that are your best case scenario.
Right.
3
And
things that you want out of the situation that's going to be good for you, good for the other person, good for any extra people that are involved.
Right. Right. Because there is positive and negative in every situation. And how do you spin it? If you're in a perceived negative situation, how do you twist it and how do you bring it back?
How do you make it
to
better?
balance?
Right.
And that's with positivity.
Right.
And that's how I live my life.
And if you do decide to banish, hex, or bind, be prepared to accept the backlash from it.
Right. Exactly.
If you see somebody beating a child on the street and you hit that person on the head with a brick and they die, you're going to go to jail.
Right.
you know?
Right.
But are you prepared to do that if you see them hurting a child?
Right.
Yeah, probably.
Right.
I'll take that risk.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
But try the lesser harm, you know?
Right.
Push the guy off first instead of
exactly
shooting him with a gun, you know?
Right.
I mean, try other steps first, I
Right.
guess is what I'm trying to say.
Exactly. So, okay, I think
So if you have any questions or comments, or if you want to share any instances where you've had to banish, bind, or hex, or if you would like some clarification about, you know, some of
we've
this,
talked about.
Yeah, you can either comment below, or if you don't feel comfortable with that, you can email us at
heartofthewitchespath@yahoo.com.
Right. If you've learned anything or appreciate anything we've said today, please give us a thumbs up.
Right. If you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button. We love to have you back to the channel.
And Helen is very prolific on her Instagram account.
I try to be active.
Which is?
Heart of the Witch's Path at Instagram or whatever the address is. So that's going to wrap it up for episode 400.
Yeah,
we're
and
excited.
thank you all for listening to us. I mean, it's been years now, which is fucking amazing.
Kind of crazy.
It's so weird. Helen's like, hey, you want to do this thing? Sure, okay. And I know that we're not as consistent as we maybe should be or could be.
Right.
But, you know, life
Hey, we're
happens.
trying.
Life happens.
We're trying and life happens.
We're doing
it.
We're here.
So thanks for listening, and that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Thanks for walking the path for a little while with us, and until next time, blessed be.